I'm so far removed from that that I forget that like I did some cringy things too. And even when it came down to like sales scripts and stuff, like just we can get into that later.
I'm super excited to get into this conversation today, mostly because a lot of the people who watch my channel know that I spend a lot of time, sharing people's maybe negative experiences in the coaching industry. And I'm in the midst of working on a video where we're discussing the boundaries between coaching and therapy. And if that video is live when this interviews published, I'll make sure to link it in the cards. But otherwise, I had the opportunity to connect with Lauren, and I'm super excited because I thought that your perspective was really interesting when it came to coaching and ethics and boundaries. And so I wanted to sort of give you the space to come and share your story, your experience. So I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll kind of carry on from there.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Ashley. I am a certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. I have over 120 coach training hours. I also I've facilitated, I think, over 220 coach training like hours in session. So I'm very familiar with the ethics and the core competencies with the International Coaching Federation anyway. They're the gold standard that governs coaching, but they're not the only one. And my focus is on helping rebellious coaches, healers, and service providers to build a business that feels really aligned to them, because a lot of my clients struggle with kind of like the do this and follow all of these strategies, but they get stuck in overthinking and then they end up not taking action. So I help them to connect with their intuition and get out there in a really big way, so that they can make the impact that they know they're here to make. So yeah.
I'd be curious to hear a bit of like your origin story, like what led you
Mhm.
to coaching?
I started my business in network marketing. I feel like a lot of people do. And it did not go well because this is where I really started to pick up on people were telling me to do things, and I felt in my body I didn't want to do it. But I did it anyway because I was like, oh, well, this is how they created a 6-figure multi level marketing company. And I thought at the time that that's the thing that was going to like help me impact lives. And then I had this kind of awakening moment and I was like, hey, I'm selling protein shakes. Like, this isn't fucking life changing. Like, if we look at the ingredients, they're probably not even helping people lose weight. You know what I mean? So there was this moment there, and they kept selling me like impact, business. And I was like, okay, this is great. But then I have to convince other people to want a business to grow my business. It just wasn't, the math wasn't mathing. And I didn't like, it felt kind of sleazy to me. I didn't like the sales approach. I didn't like how they were teaching me to sell. It felt very like just unethical. And this was before I ever had any coach training. This was before I knew anything about ICF, although my mom is an executive coach and she actually owns the coaching academy that I teach in. I didn't even know what she did as a coach at that time. So then I got into health coaching because I originally was wanting, I have a background in psychology. So I was wanting to help people with their health and nutrition, like live a healthier lifestyle. And what I did was I kind of took what I learned in MLM, because once I started in that industry, I really had a fascination with health. So I started watching all these documentaries and reading a ton of books and attending lectures on health and nutrition and all of that. So I absorbed a lot of information. And then what I realized was like, okay, well, people like they could know the thing, but then what's holding them back from actually like making the change, right? So I paired nutrition with psychology to help people in that way. But the issue was I was promoting myself as a coach without any coach training. And I knew that that wasn't ethical, but I did it anyway because, again, I followed the advice of my coach at the time. So basically, my origin story is following a bunch of people's advice, going against my internal wisdom, and hitting roadblock after roadblock because I didn't trust myself enough, if this makes sense, to do what I felt was right. I kept seeking success strategies and going against what I felt on the inside, and kind of like disregarding my own internal guidance system. And so that's why that's such an important piece of what I do today with my clients.
Yeah, I really love that. I just got off a chat with a woman who is a lawyer, and we were discussing, the legalities of like coaching contracts and that sort of thing. But she was bringing up the point of how it's so important to not let the like imposter syndrome or the things you don't know be the reason that leads you into like blindly following someone who looks like they have it all together, right? Because I think like especially with the internet, anyone can present themselves as like successful or knowing the answers to all these things. And if we want to start a health coaching business or we want to, be a coach or supporter of people, we might just blindly follow whatever the advice is that we're given, even if we don't like it. And I know even in my own experience with coaching, I worked with I'll call her like a marketing coach at one point, and she would tell me every day I needed to add like 50 new friends to Facebook so that I could like I'd find people who were my target audience and then I would add them as friends and start conversations with them. And like, I would never do that now. But at the time, I didn't know any better and she looked successful. So I was like, that must be
Okay.
how people are getting clients. Like, okay, sure. And so, very much to what you're speaking to, of like, you can tell that something like feels icky, but if you don't know, you don't know. So you just blindly listen to whatever someone is telling you to do. I'd be curious to hear then, you're in this position, you're kind of just like going with the flow, something feels off. Like, what was the transition out of that?
Oh God, like a lot of failing, I would say. So it's so funny because you mentioned that strategy of like adding 50 friends, and I'm like, God, I forget that these things are even being spoken about because I'm so far removed from that I forget that like I did some cringy things too. And even when it came down to like sales scripts and stuff, like just we can get into that later. So the transition really came. So I was doing my health coaching thing, and somehow I ended up in this niche of helping people with binge eating. And I tell this story all the time because there are so many coaches, like marketing business coaches out there, who are really so focused on niching people down. And I agree that niching and having a clear message is really important. Um, but you have to partner with your client to get there, and the client has to feel confident and enough in what they're doing to like speak up if that's not the thing that they actually do. And I didn't feel confident at the time, so I was like, okay, I help people with binge eating. And then months later I'm like, wait a minute, like I studied psychology. Binge eating is an actual mental illness that I am not qualified to help people with. So from there, I started kind of just like unraveling that and not doing that anymore. I pivoted from that, realizing I was attracting a ton of people who really needed a psychologist and not just like me who was not equipped to deal with those issues. So once I stopped kind of niching myself into that binge eating and I was trying on different things, I realized I became really good at mindset. So one of the a key thing here was paying attention to the actual results I was getting people versus before I was kind of just like following what my business coach said to do. So in retrospect, in case anyone's listening and is like, oh, what should I do? I would have gone out and helped more people before niching myself to get more of that kind of like market research and play more in the industry and play more with my talents and my skills before ever niching myself down into something that specific. But everyone has to start somewhere. So I started picking up on the things that I actually help people with and realizing like, oh, I'm really good at helping people get what they want and I'm really good at mindset. So I kind of transitioned into helping people manifest their dream body, which was a little bit closer to where I wanted to be, but it still felt very like surface to me. And then from there, I went into helping people overcome their limiting beliefs, tap into their intuition, and manifest the life that they know they want to create. And what this is where things really started to pivot for me because I stopped again following like all of that expert advice. I stopped holding myself back from creating this perfect strategy. I stopped like overthinking everything and I really just leaned into like, okay, Lauren, what do you want to do? What do you want to say? What stories do you want to tell? Right. And and sharing the impact that I actually had on people's lives, like my client experiences, all of that stuff. And that was the first time I feel like I really gave myself permission to lean into my self trust. And it was a really big game changer for me, because I spent less time overthinking my strategies and overthinking the things I thought I should do, and more time just being. And a really big part of coaching actually is being, right? Like learning how to be the person that gets the results that they want to get.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the reason why I was attracted to you and like having this conversation is that even in listening to you tell your story, it's very clear to me that you haven't fallen into this trap that I see a lot of people unfortunately in the space fall into, where they don't ask questions and they don't reflect on what they're doing and see whether or not they're actually having an impact, like you mentioned, like what are the results your clients are getting, or whether or not they're even acting in a way that is within the scope of what a coaching relationship is. And I know when you and I originally talked, we kind of touched on this, but the concept of what is coaching, what is, something like mentorship or consulting, and how I think in the space, a lot of times, I'm kind of taking the conversation somewhere else here, but in the space, from what I've seen, is a lot of people misunderstanding the differences between those things and then calling themselves a coach, but acting in the way of a consultant or acting in the way of a mentor. And I know even for me, like unpacking my negative experiences with the industry, it took me many years to realize that like I paid a coach, but I wasn't getting coaching. I was getting consulting. And maybe that's why part of the reason why I didn't get what I thought I paid for. You know what I mean? So I think that you're a great example of someone, because in my comment section a lot, I get like, well, what is a good coach? What does a good coach
Mhm.
look like? What should I look for if I'm looking to hire someone to coach me? And
Yeah.
so I guess if you want to speak to the experience of like understanding what coaching is, understanding how it differs from maybe other forms of service provision,
Mhm.
I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Absolutely. And I just want to say too, like I've had my own share of bad coaching experiences that I've also had to unpack. After my first business coach that I hired, I didn't hire another business coach for like 2 or 3 years after that. And even that coach was kind of just, mm, I don't know, there I learned some things, let's just say that. Um, so I think the first thing that somebody should look for when hiring a coach is, and I will get into like what makes a good coach, but one of the first things that I notice a lot of coaches who are driven by their ego and maybe not in alignment with ethics is offering one-off coaching calls just to like let your future clients try it on, because not every coach and client is going to align. Like just because I say that I can get you these results, just because, and which by the way, you can never promise results because like you can't. If I say like, okay, we can work on these things, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to feel safe enough in my presence to go deep enough to get the transformation that we need to get to the place you want to be, if this makes sense. So, one of the things that I actually stopped offering connection calls, that's what I call them, connection calls, to see like, okay, are we a good fit? Do you feel good in my energy? Do I even like you? I stopped doing that because a lot of coaches were like, oh, you can just get someone to fill out an application and send them the payment link and like cha-ching, you make money. And I just feel like that's so unethical, because I want my clients to feel really good in my presence, and I want both of us to know, and you can't tell just based off of filling in an application. So, if you are considering hiring a coach who only has an application process and you don't actually get a face-to-face call to try it on, ask them first, because you will get a feel for their coaching style. My last coach that I hired, I didn't get a like a trial call, and I think if I had a trial call, it would have completely changed my decision to invest in that person, because I would have seen exactly what I needed to see to know that that wasn't going to be a good fit for me. So that's one of the first things I would recommend is try somebody on, like whether that's a free discovery call, even if you have to pay to have a one-off session, get a feel for it before committing thousands of dollars into a package that you don't know if you're going to resonate with this person.
What up, dudes? Editing Neil here. I thought it was just important to interject that the call being referred to here is not the same as the sales calls that I rag on in most of my content. What she's referencing in this interview is a fit call. So, in many businesses, typically, I do this in my own business, you will have potential clients fill out a form. You then get on a call to actually discuss working together. This is not so someone can pressure you into a sale. This is so you, as a service provider, can see whether or not what the client is looking for is something you can actually provide. And so, I know often in my content, I will refer to high pressure sales calls where people will say the only way we can work together is if we get on a call, and then on that call, they try to pressure you into a sale. And while yes, there are people who do this, and yes, you might end up in a situation where this happens, this is not the type of call that's being referred to in this conversation. This conversation is, again, referring to the opportunity for you to get on a call with a potential coach to see if you're a good fit. If at that point they try to force you into handing over your credit card, run away, don't sign up. That in itself is a red flag. But if you get on this call and then they pitch you their program and offer you the opportunity to think about whether or not you want to sign up, that is something completely different. And I thought it was important for me to just come on and clarify that differentiation. If you have questions about this, make sure to leave them in the comments and I will address them individually. But I thought it was important to clarify that now before we continue on in this conversation. Okay, thanks. Bye.
In terms of what makes a good coach, so something to look for if and when you do get a connection call or some sort of like discovery call, trial call, whatever that is, pay attention to how much space the coach gives you to talk and process, because this is a really big thing that we teach in coaching. So there's this thing that is called the 80-20 rule. The client should be talking 80% of the time and the coach should be talking 20% of the time, because we're not informing, we're not teaching, we're asking questions and we're holding space. So if the person that you are considering as a coach shows you that they are there to hold the space for you and that they're not interrupting you, unless it's like a respectful and very intentional interruption. But if they can hold the space and ask you the powerful questions that make you go, oh, that's interesting, I haven't thought of that, or oh, that's a really good question, that is probably a good sign that they would be a good coach for you, because they're asking you the thought-provoking questions and the questions that are likely to lead to the transformation that you need.
And then what would
Advice?
you define
Yeah.
as like the difference between
Yeah.
coaching and mentorship? Like if I'm looking for a coach, why would I be looking for a coach?
Right. So I would say mentorship. So if you here's a business example, just because we're both in the business and marketing world, right? So if you're brand new to business, you have no idea how to run a business, you might want to have a mentor. If you already have a ton of knowledge about business and you like are familiar with strategies and you've seen some success, you probably need to hire a coach. You might want to hire both depending on where you're at, what your needs are. But a coach is really going to help you to unlock the answers that you have within. So let's say, for example, I just did a podcast episode on overcoming resistance. So let's say that you have a business plan, you've executed the business plan, like everything's ready to go, but you haven't hit publish. Like you're, for some reason, like not following through on your business plan. You might need a coach to help you work through the mindset that is holding you back from taking big action in your business. So that's like one example. If you want to kind of just like, if you know that the patterns that you're repeating in your life and your business are not serving you, and you need to kind of figure out a different path forward, a coach would also be really helpful for that. Those are the two that are coming to mind right now for me. There's probably
Yes.
several other instances.
100%. I think for me, like in my understanding, a coach is someone who kind of just like holds you accountable or guides you towards something that you already know you want to create and you kind of have the understanding of how to get there. You just need someone to like reassure you along the way. Whereas like a consultant or a mentor is going to work actively with you to figure out what those answers are.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in my business, I take a mentoring, consulting, and coaching approach, which can be confusing and sometimes also very challenging. But there are times where like your clients do need to know how to do something. But I would say a lot of the time, and the majority of the time that I do spend with my clients, is asking them the right questions to help them see for themselves maybe how to apply the material to their business. So, this is where I think mentoring and coaching can actually be a really good pair, because if we're just mentoring, that's where we get a lot of people who just do the things that they think they should do. But when we couple coaching with mentoring or consulting, we can not only teach how to do something, but also help our clients apply the information to them, their life, their business, their career, whatever it is. Does that make sense?
In a way that feels good to them. I think that's
Right.
so
Yeah.
important, and that's what's missing in a lot of the coaching experiences I've had or ones that I've heard of from other people is like, well, my coach told me I had to do it this way, so I did it and I hated it or it didn't work or
Yeah.
whatever. Whereas if we can
Yeah.
make it like a collaborative relationship, I think that there's a good opportunity there.
Absolutely. And if anybody is listening to this hating the strategies that they're doing, like that is your number one sign right there not to do them and to figure out something else, because like energy, I don't know how woo your audience is, but energy is really potent and powerful. And if you are feeling any sort of resistance, even if you are pushing through and doing the thing, like it's not going to translate well. Your energy is going to shine through that, right? And you might experience some results, but it's not going to be to your fullest potential.
Yeah, I really love that. And I guess this would be more on like the service provider side. Again, just thinking of like questions that my audience asks me a lot is like, as someone who I perceive as like operating well in the coaching space, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts for people who I get a lot of messages being like, Danielle, I want to become a coach, but I don't want to be associated with all of the nonsense that's happening in the industry. How can I operate my business in a way that doesn't get perceived like that? And like for me, I always tell people like really get in tune with your values and make sure that you're acting in alignment with whatever those guiding principles are for you. But I'd be curious to hear if you have anything to add to that conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I think that those are two really key things, is values. And that's something that I didn't learn until I started coach training. So again, had I taken coach training before calling myself a coach and doing this all like all these other things, and maybe I would have, done things differently. Values is really key. Your ethics and standards, like figure out how you operate, what you believe to be true. If you don't have coach training that's ICF accredited, I would highly recommend, even if it's just a weekend course, I more so recommend getting certified. But if you don't want to get certified, at least take some sort of accredited coach training, because I'm serious when I say it's going to be 100% a game changer for you. The way that I thought coaching was before and how coaching actually is was like it's night and day. So get at least some sort of coach training under your belt. And the other thing that I would add to that is, if you don't want to be grouped into the industry, and I speak of this from my own experience, because even as a certified coach, I was still like, oh my God, do I even want to be a coach? Like, this industry is awful. There's so much shit going on. Like, am I doing this shit? But of course, upon reflection, I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm within my own, like within the standards and ethics and all of that stuff. I'm good. But it does really take a toll on your mindset. So having blinders is really key. But I would say start talking online about your, maybe I wouldn't say talk about like your perspective and experience with the negative side, but shine the light on like what you believe to be true about coaching and how you help your clients, and start to bring more of those like case studies to the forefront. How do you address client situations when a client comes to you and asks a question about like, how should I X, Y, and Z? You can share a story about how you help them navigate that, just to give your future clients or just your audience an idea of how you do coach.
Yeah, I think that's a super important piece. And I mean, I'm always telling people, similar to what you mentioned earlier, too, is like, don't be guaranteeing people results, making promises you can't fulfill. That in itself is usually one of the biggest red flags to me, whether it's monetary return or I'm going to guarantee you're going to find your lifelong partner or whatever the claim is. It's like, don't market yourself in that way. If you don't want to be scammy, don't make scammy promises. is, for lack of a better way to say it, you know?
100%. And like I mentioned this earlier, but I think looking at the results you do provide and knowing that those results are enough is super key. I think that's one of the biggest things that makes people get stuck in their head or feel inadequate is that they don't believe that the results that they do provide are good enough compared to all of these other coaches who are promising the moon, you know? So stay in integrity with what you offer, and you should be good.
And do you have a particular way that you collect that feedback or like
Mhm.
um interact with your clients? I guess I ask because a lot of the negative experiences that I've heard are, and this was my own experience as well, actually, where I was never given the opportunity to give feedback to my
Yeah.
coach. So whether it was positive or negative, she never asked me. So, what do you do as a practicing coach to make sure that you're getting that feedback and actually using it to improve your services?
I'm so glad that you asked that question. I'm a systems queen. So I love systems that help support me as a coach and support my clients. So the first thing that I do with my clients is a pre-assessment. So our pre-assessment sets the foundation of our coaching container. Halfway through and I'm always checking in too. So there's like more opportunities. I'm always asking like, what are you gaining? How can I help you? What else do you need? Any feedback, right? Um, and I really try my best to be fully present with their experience and like ask them questions, direct questions about what they need and how I can be better. Halfway through our coaching package, I do a midway reflection. So we look at, okay, what's everything you've accomplished? What maybe is still getting in our way? I can't remember exactly the questions, but I always leave space in there as well for feedback. Is there anything that I can do as your coach to better support you? Um, how is it going? Like, how are things going? And I think that something that I just need people to hear is that like we are human beings, we're not fucking perfect. It's okay as a coach to not be perfect. It's okay to not have all of the answers, and it is okay to also get feedback and to ask for feedback. I was never modeled that from my coaches, so this is something I had to kind of realize myself and implement. And then at the end of our coaching container, I always have an exit survey and I always ask them to rate like how is this part of the course? How is this part of the course? How is this part of Lauren's coaching? Like what feedback do you have for me as your coach? That I can do to improve because instead of coming at it from an ego perspective, which I think a lot of coaches do, unfortunately, I more so come at it from a perspective of like, hey, I'm not perfect and I'm always looking to improve my services. What can you offer me to help with that?
Yeah, and I think as a service provider, it's important to, especially if you're someone who is motivated by the actual results you provide your client, right? You want to make sure that you're able to deliver that in the best way possible. And in my opinion, the best way to do that is to get the actual feedback that tells you what is working and what isn't working so that the next time around you can work to improve it. Or if someone has a significant issue with you, you can work to resolve it because I mean, I'm a people pleaser, but the last thing I want is someone to be like upset with me because they feel like they didn't get what they paid for, right? So I think that sometimes, and I don't know if it's like the motivation of just wanting to make as much money as possible. That seems to be the theme that I've observed. But in those circumstances, there's a lot less room to get that feedback because, like, I don't want anyone asking me for a refund, you know? So
Mhm.
it's interesting to see, and so I appreciate you for sharing the system that you use that works for you.
Yeah, I find a lot of coaches ask for testimonials, but don't ask for feedback, which I find interesting. So, yeah, it's a
Well,
good
and
practice, I think, for everyone to get into.
exactly, and again, like, regardless of what industry you're in, if you're a
Mhm.
copywriter, a web designer, whatever, like, find out what your client liked about the process or not so you can make things more efficient as you grow as a business. So,
100%.
I'm curious, I guess, just if you have any last words in terms of or thoughts about what makes for a productive relationship between coach and client and being able to uphold boundaries. So again, kind of shifting the conversation in a different direction here, but I just think that boundaries is a big one. And I know we talked about this last time in terms of like coaches maybe not knowing where to draw the line when it comes to what they work through with clients. And so how you do that in your business and what you perceive as sort of happening in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think that really getting to know yourself as a coach is really important. And we do that through reflective practice. So, a rule that I've created over time, like it's taken me a little bit of time after coach training and like working with my clients, is that I will ask all of the open ended, curious questions that I can prior to giving advice or like answering a question. So sometimes a client will come to me and be like, okay, well, how did you do this? And I'm like, okay, I hear that question, but I want to try to see if we can get you to your own answer first before sharing my process. So I guess what I'm getting at is really like clear communication. People can't read your freaking mind. Like we all have our own worlds going on in our head. And so the clearest you can be with your client in your questions, your feedback, your process, the better the relationship is going to be. And in terms of boundaries, like have an agreement, right? Like set up the boundaries at the beginning. I have created my own onboarding process in my business where every time, whether it's a new client or a repeat client, I go through this process so that they know what to expect, right? I think again, so many people just assume that people know like what coaching is or how you work or this or that. And no, like you have to lay it out. Every coach has a different process, every coach has a different whatever, different boundaries. So I think the clearer that we can be with boundaries at the forefront, the better the relationship because our client's going to know what to expect. And kind of like, let's bring a relationship example into this, right? So I don't know, like I've heard a lot of people kind of establish safe words in their relationship. Like if you're having a triggering conversation with your partner, then maybe you have some sort of process to like walk through that or say, hey, I need a break or whatever. So if you can establish that in your coaching relationship as well, where you're like, okay, if you have this thing come up and you need support in this way, then here's the process for that, right? And just kind of walking your client through like, what do they do when they need something else? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's like coming back to this piece of like remembering that we're humans, our clients are humans. I think sometimes, especially in like, I'm thinking in the context of business coaching specifically, people can sometimes like equate clients to dollar signs and then they're not so focused on the fact that like this is actually like a relationship, right? So, and it's not just transactional. So, just kind of approaching it with that perspective or that lens, I think it helps to foster that sense of safety and productivity.
Something that I always am coming back to is like, you know, the coaching conversations that I have are so deeply transformational. And like people share their visions with me that they have never told anybody before. And I always just come back to the gratitude of it. Like, I'm so grateful that I get to work with these human beings and hear these stories or these beliefs and hold that space for them. I think a lot of coaches again they get caught up in the dollar signs and the transaction and the results and the this and the that they forget how much of a privilege it is to really be in a space like this. Not everybody shares, like I share my story pretty vulnerably because of, you know, the work that I do and who I am as a person, but that's not the case for everybody. So I think the more that we can come into gratitude and just remember that like it's such a blessing that we get to do this work and that we get to work with these other incredible human beings. And I think that human piece is really important. I think the better that our relationships can be with our clients and with just humans in general, like other people in the industry. So
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the transparency and the opportunity to speak with someone who is like doing good in the space. Cause I think even for me, like obviously a lot of my content is like fairly heavy on the snark. So it's
mhm.
nice to be on the other side of the conversation as well sometimes.
Totally. I'm just glad like that you are doing this work because it is such a challenge and I like yeah, I've had my fair share of processing of like, you know, ending a coaching relationship with a coach I had hired and being like what a fucking waste of money and like like I don't even know where I am and just feeling major regret. So I'm glad that somebody is doing this work because I think it's really important. So thank you. And thank you for having me.
Do you have any like parting words of advice or anything that you want people to take away from the conversation?
I'm really big on intuition right now. So, I mean, I'm always big on intuition, but particularly right now is like listen to your intuition. And I know that that's so much easier said than done. But if there's any piece of advice I have is just pay attention to that niggling voice that's, wherever you feel it in your body, if it's in your gut, if it's in your head, but pay attention to it and know that there's a reason that it's there. And even if you don't act on it, just maybe kind of start to build a relationship with that and see where that takes you.
I love that. I will say anytime I have not done that, it's always come out, 3 to 6 months later that I should have just
Yeah,
listened. So
like, yeah, I know, right? Even for me, like I'm pretty connected with my intuition, but I still get carried away sometimes and I doubt myself or, make a decision that's not in alignment. And then I'm like, damn, but it's okay.
we live and we learn.
We're always learning. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I
Thank
was
you
just
so
gonna
much.
say, if anyone has any questions for me, please feel free to send me a DM. I can leave you my Instagram details. That's where I hang out the most.
Yeah, I'll have everything linked down below. And you said you have a podcast as
Oh,
well,
I
so
do. Yeah,
I
it's
can
called
link
the
that.
Aligned and Magnetic Podcast. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll make sure that's
Yeah.
linked in the description too.
Thank you so much.
Leave a guess in the comments how many times you think I have filmed this outro. Three times. First time, no good. Second time, mic was off. Third time, here we are. Hello! Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this interview, I know it's different from my normal interviews here on this channel, please share your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel if we're not already. We are not already. I'm not subscribed, am I? I don't know. Can you subscribe to your own channel on YouTube? I don't even know. We just hit 25,000 subscribers here though. I am so thankful. Thank you for being here. I really, truly do appreciate it. I also want to take this time to shout out my channel VIP members, as well as those of you in the billionaire tier. Just know that your paid support of my content, regular members as well, does not go unnoticed. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for being here. I'm going to leave you on screen here with a video that came out last week sharing the results of a survey that I conducted over a few months, interviewing online service providers who have worked for coaches. They're sharing the good, they're sharing the bad. We talk about it all. So be sure to click here, take care, comb your hair, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!